And now let's take a look at some stories from the African continent, where Guinea-Bissau's President Mali and Burkina Faso has assumed office as ECOWAS new chairman of authority for the next 1 year. He was elected on Sunday in Accra to succeed Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo, who held the position for almost 2 years. Gambia's Omar Aliyu Toure was also introduced as the new president of the ECOWAS Commission, replacing Côte d'Ivoire's Jean-Claude Cassibro, who has served a 4-year mandate with an extension of 3 months and 10 days ending on the 10th of July. The leaders will face the task of addressing the challenges of the ECOWAS member states, with 3 of the members on the military rule.
Well, let's bring in Achike Chude, who is an African Affairs Analyst, to discuss the challenges ahead of the new ECOWAS chairman. Thank you so much, Achike, for joining us on the news tonight. But before we look at the challenges ahead of the new chair, let's talk about the reign of Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo. We saw quite, military takeover, the number of military takeover on the region, really. We saw Mali, we saw Burkina Faso, we saw Guinea. How would you describe his tenure?
Well, I would say his tenure was colorful, but again, you have to define what you mean by colorful. It was full of events, and the events were not too pleasant. When you talk about the political dispensations that were changed in Mali, Guinea, and then Burkina Faso, of course, that was not good because that might give the impression that perhaps it was not as effective as it should have been. But when you look at the effort that he put in, or that the ECOWAS put in under him to try to reverse the anti-democratic takeover of democratic governments and institutions in those 3 countries, then you realize that a lot of effort, has been made, and I think it was, challenging. Then you also look at the issue of COVID. It didn't start under his tenure, but obviously his tenure bore the brunt of the response, to the COVID in West Africa. So that was also a very difficult period with its the consequences on the social and economic infrastructure in West Africa. But by and by, I think he did fairly well in terms of trying to galvanize the West African sub-region towards positive action to combat these incidences and others that happen within the African, the West African sub-region.
Right. Well, he fared fairly well, using your words right now. But you know what? The ECOWAS is beyond just one man, even though he was in charge. It was a 15-member board at the end of the day. But let's have a look at, some of the sanctions that were imposed on some of these countries where we have the military encroaching on democracies. And one wonders how effective these sanctions are, because I'm looking at the communique from the heads of government yesterday. They are now lifting the sanctions on Mali and Burkina Faso, even though there are still some caveats, So the question to you right now is, what really warranted the lifting of the sanctions, where we know that the military are still in charge in these countries?
Well, I think it's a give and take situation, and in this kind of matters, it's not always about the stick. It's about carrot and stick. You try to encourage them to move in a particular direction. And if they move in those directions, you try to reward them. If they do otherwise, you try to impose some punitive actions against them. That is why the sanctions were placed in the first place. And then, of course, there has been this, back and forth about when some of these governments will want to take their countries back to democracy. Some gave a longer term of a political engagement before they can return them to democracy. About ECOWAS refused on each of those instances. And the reason why some of these sanctions are being lifted is essentially because they are beginning to see movements, positive movements in the right direction. Of course, it's not yet uhuru, but for instance, with Mali, recently, the announcement by the military junta about, engaging in democratic processes, leading within, I think, 2 years, I think is something that is heartwarming. And that's why you're beginning to see this kind of a response from ECOWAS.
And Achike, what are the expectations for Embalo in such a time where we still have, this military takeover happening?
Yeah, well, I think he didn't say much except to express happiness and joy at his being appointed as a chairman of ECOWAS. But I think the outgoing, ECOWAS chairman set the template of what needs to be done, and he was looking at the situation of, for instance, agriculture, and he says that the West African sub-region must be able to increase agricultural output to combat the global distortions, caused by, global inflation. And then again, the issue of COVID-19. Of course, again, this is a sub-region that is made in all kinds of political crises, especially the three countries we are talking about. So he said that it is important, for the regional action plan against terrorism to be activated, and that he also called for coordinated collective response to the threat of instability caused by terrorists in the sub-region. And of course, obviously, Mbolo, the new chairman, knows that these are some of the things he has to tackle. And I think he has some level of gratitude for ECOWAS because they were there for him. The last time there was a military attempt to push him out of power, ECOWAS deployed a stabilization force in Guinea-Bissau. So I think that these are essentially the mandates, the issue of insecurity, how to synergize, how to galvanize the rest of the West African, sub-region to come together for the purpose of a collective action against the terrorism. That is sorely needed because you can see that the terrorism in the West African sub-region has been spreading with some devastating effects.
Right, and of course, even Gambia's Omar Aliyu Toure also takes over as the ECOWAS Commission President, especially looking at the fact that they've now reduced that board from what some will regard as a wasteful 15-member board to now just 7. But we look forward to what they're able to achieve, for the sub-region, really. But for now, I would have to say thank you so much to you, Achike Chude, for joining us tonight on the program.